Now, the national bestseller, Born Again, the true story of Charles Colson.
Wow.
That's the 70s.
Dude, 1978. I found that this week, and it's on YouTube, but
Sure.
Dean Jones from the Herbie movies, that's what you're looking at is Charles Colson, and the legendary Anne Francis, who I had a mad crush on as a kid. She has a little mole right here, and she played Honey West, which I have the full box set of, where her companion was a lynx, the cat, the lynx on a chain. And she wore like a leopard suit, and she would go around solving crimes as a PI. Highly recommend Anne Francis as Honey West. It was a short-lived Aaron Spelling production on ABC, but man, was she hot. She was also famous for Twilight Zone episodes. People who know Anne Francis, she's in some of the most famous Twilight Zone episodes. And here, playing Charles Colson's wife, Dean Jones is very good as Charles Colson, and the guy playing Nixon is great. And everyone else is playing themselves in this movie. There is Harold Hughes plays himself in the movie, as does Reverend Billy Graham, who's in the movie. And with some pretty good file footage. It's kind of like, I don't even know what it is. It's kind of like a movie of the week for the Christian broadcast. It
screams ABC Aaron Spelling movie of the week.
Right. I think that's what it was, but it covers, the reason it's good is it covers every beat in the book. And the book, this is, I have it on audio, but this is the hard copy of the paperback version of Born Again by Charles Colson. The book, thanks to the book club people for donating this. The book is the equivalent of Witness for Whittaker Chambers, if you know what I mean, Eric. The book just sold 1 billion copies, first of all, coming right out of the gate. And he has a Born Again conversion, which we're going to get into. And then the things that Charles Colson became after prison. But in that movie, you will see how they flash back, like he's going to prison at the beginning of the movie, and that gate slams shut. And in fact, it's the Air Force Base, Maxwell Air Force Base prison in Montgomery, Alabama, that I drove by when we had the meetup in Montgomery, because a lot of the Watergate people, including John Mitchell, did their time at this Air Force Base prison in Montgomery, Alabama, which is still there. And they shot in the prison this particular movie with Dean Jones and Anne Francis from Honey West, which I highly recommend for people who know.
How long did he serve?
He was sentenced to 1 to 3 years, and he got a very harsh sentence. And we're going to get into it, so I don't want to give it away, but we'll get into it. We're going to start at the beginning of this guy. Charles Colson, by the way, is one of the most fascinating characters in Watergate. He is a brainiac high school kid who goes to a private school. His family is kind of working middle class. His father works nights to become a lawyer, eventually becomes a lawyer, the father does. The grandfather dies from pneumonia. The father puts himself through law school while working in a butcher shop. So they're not upper class, but he's raised in Boston, and he despises the Kennedy Brahmin types who are running Boston, Eric. And he is half Swedish and half British, half English. And they are called swamp Yankees. This type, not just him, there's a type of working class ex-Brits, not ex-Brits, but British descendants in Boston who are called swamp Yankees. And that's what he was. He was a working class swamp Yankee.
Is that like a variant of like Scots Irish in the East?
I don't know if it's a variant, but it's similar to that. And there's also various ones like Elvis being a timber sheik down in Memphis. The timber sheiks was another type of white, trashy, working class white name for that. There was the Swamp Yankees up north. But he despises the Brahmin, Boston, Kennedy types and is a Republican. In fact, he's in the Young Republican Club in college, and he joins when he gets out of high school. He goes to a private school, and his father barely makes the tuition payments in the fourth quarter of the final year. His father's like hassling as a lawyer to make payments for his son's tuition way over their financial head. And he goes and he graduates first in his class. He's valedictorian, gives the speech, honor student, the whole 9 yards at the school. He then joins the Marines, Hunley, and this is post Korean War. And who is his commander? The legendary Chesty Puller. And Chesty Puller, who is his hero, his heroes are Chesty Puller. He said his favorite song was the Marine Hymn. With Chesty Puller, John Wayne, and Richard Nixon are his three heroes. He ends up off the coast of Guatemala, ironically, with a group of Marines. This is kind of weird. In 1954, he's commissioned as the youngest company commander in Marine history at the age of 23. Okay? That's who Chuck Colson is. People don't know who Chuck Colson is. Fascinating character. So he's off the coast of Guatemala with a crew ready to invade Guatemala with Chesty Puller. And ironically, which he doesn't know yet, the guy involved in the overthrowing of the communist government in Guatemala is E. Howard Hunt, who's down there unbeknownst to, he doesn't know him at all. I mean, he's 23 years old. And Hunt is involved, obviously, as we recovered in the Hunt story. This is the same situation. Apparently, they sent in the Marines in 1954-55 to make sure that Guatemala didn't go communist. Let me just put it that way. And they did not invade. The Marines did not go ashore in that particular incident. They would later go ashore numerous times in the Dominican Republic and later Grenada and all kinds of other stories. But for the sake of this, he worships the blood and guts commander, Lieutenant General Chesty Puller, and he is indeed a legend. So he gets out of there, and he gets a full scholarship to Harvard. He goes and meets the dean of Harvard, Eric, and the dean is this like Brahmin that he despises, and he says, "Good news, son. You've received a through some kind of connection through ROTC or whatever." He gets a full scholarship to Harvard. And the dean says, this is where you're going to be living, and you're going to be doing this, and you're going to be doing that. And he says, how do you feel about that? And he says, well, I haven't made up my mind yet. And he goes, what? He says, nobody's ever turned down a scholarship to Harvard. And he said, well, I guess I'm going to be the first one. And he kind of says, go fuck yourself. And he walks out the door and gets a scholarship to Brown in Rhode Island. And he just hated these Brahmins so much, Eric, that he turned down a full scholarship to Harvard so he wouldn't be one of them, which I found to be fascinating. But he has a full scholarship and goes to Brown, which is still an Ivy League school. So,
sounds a little like Barnes in that.
Yeah. He hated these people. He was a brainiac. He could have gone to any one of these. And obviously the dean said no one has ever turned down a scholarship, and he didn't expect him to. But he said, I'll let you know. And he splits. And the dean's left with his pipe in his hand, like stunned, according to, his book, Born Again, which I highly recommend. And the people who know it have probably read it. But there's a lot of good stuff in there about how he grew up. And then going to Brown, he becomes the head of the Young Republicans. He becomes a debater. He gets a law school degree from Georgetown University Law School. So he starts working for a major firm they put together in Boston, and then branches out into D.C. He does this for like 7 years as a lawyer in D.C., Eric. So he is making 9 years. He does this as a partner They changed the name, whatever the hell it was. I forget the name of the firm, but he's really in there for 9 long years. And then he is brought in to the Nixon White House. And this is where the story really begins. And he goes to church one day in DC, and he's already in the Nixon White House. And Nixon is shaking everyone's hand at the church, and he shakes Colson's hand, and he doesn't even know who Colson is. And this completely humiliates Colson because he's already in the White House. And the guy says, and he says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I work for you." And he goes, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm Charles Colson." He goes, "All right, I never heard of you." So this really fucks with his head. So he comes in and he manipulates so quickly and so fast that it makes Ehrlichman and Haldeman stunned, because there's really 4 power centers in the White House, and it's Ehrlichman, Haldeman, George Shultz, who's Secretary of State, and Kissinger. There's 4 staffs. That's it. There's 4 staffs. So all of a sudden, he meets with Nixon, Colson, and he is able to, I don't know how to put this, he becomes like the id of Nixon's mind. He becomes the dark side of all the dark thoughts that Nixon wants to do. And Haldeman and Ehrlichman famously have said over the years that they would listen to Nixon saying, "Do this, do that," crazy crap, Eric, and they wouldn't do it. And the next day, Nixon would say, "Forget about what I told you last night. That was just crazy." And they knew that already because they knew Nixon so well. Now, keep in mind, Haldeman and Ehrlichman are Christian Scientists. They don't drink. They don't smoke. They're like straight edges, Eric. People don't realize who these guys were coming out of Orange County, coming out of the business like Mad Men, where he was working at J. Walter Thompson, Haldeman, the big advertising agency. He didn't want any part of this administration. He was making big money as an ad executive. So anyway, Colson and Nixon bond, and this bond becomes unbreakable. And he will eventually get an office right next to Nixon. To the nasty responses from Haldeman and Ehrlichman, who see their power being usurped, Eric, by Charles Colson. There's Colson with Nixon, obviously, and he would go in and see the president anytime he wanted, and he would jawbone with him for hours about political stuff. Now, what are they jawboning about? It's about stuff that Nixon wants other people to do, but they won't do. He says he's got the brass balls of a monkey. If I want anything done, I'll get Colson. Colson would run over his grandmother to get me reelected. Colson becomes the dirty tricks operator of the Nixon id in his mind. The dark side of Nixon comes out in the work of Charles Colson. All the dark stuff that Ehrlichman and Haldeman and Kissinger are trying to avoid having happen is happening because they have bonded together, Colson and Nixon. Every crazy idea that Nixon has had, which they have tamped down or not done by their own instinct, Colson is carrying out behind their backs, if that makes any sense. Yeah. And Nixon is authorizing this. Not only is he authorizing it, he is so relieved that somebody's finally fucking doing what he wants. And he would be frustrated saying, "I want this done. Get this story planted." Okay, so the Speaker of the House was an alcoholic, Carl Albert, right? And Carl Albert, Democrat, was giving them trouble about passing some legislation. So Nixon said, "I want a story in the paper that he's a drunk." And he was a drunk. He crashed his car a million fucking times. The police kept letting him off. He had DUIs coming out of his ass. And this is the Speaker of the House, Eric, right? He would go drinking every night. So Nixon says, "I want a story planted in the paper about Carl Albert." So Ehrlichman and Haldeman wouldn't do this. This is the stuff that Colson would do. And he would just say, "Get me Charles, get me Colson. Colson will do this." And Colson would do this. Colson's staff immediately grows to over 25 people. Got a staff of 25, Eric, operating underneath him in the span of a month. That's how quickly he set up his operation. And what does his operation entail? Well, one of the things it entails is this Carl Albert, poor guy. He had so many DUIs. Anyway, so one of the things it entails was, which we covered, where he wants to get an NLF flag. This is when Hoover dies, and they have this anti-war protest, and they're worried about them disrupting Hoover's funeral, but they never did. All these speakers were there. William Kunstler was there. Bowdoin was there. Ellsberg was there speaking against the war. So what Nixon wanted was some group to start disrupting these protests. And that's where Colson comes in. Colson brings in, he'll bring in Hunt, he'll bring in Liddy, he'll bring in the Cubans, and he wants a scalp, the scalp being the Viet Cong flag. And he wants to give it to Nixon. They never got the flag. There was no flag there that day. But they did disrupt the protest. They did punch people in the face. They did get violent. And this will later lead to Charles Colson bringing in the head of the construction union in New York, who organized this hard hat rebellion down on Wall Street, which the left called the hard hat riot. It's now very famous, 1970 hard hat rebellion. In the middle of an anti-war protest, these hard hats, these construction workers, started to disrupt the protest. This was organized by Charles Colson. This is the stuff that Colson did. Maybe we could show a little bit of that very famous event.
Between our only difference that we may have is the procedure to use for ending. And we want the boys home. We want them home from our family names and where they came from.
Kind of hard to hear, but we can look.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I mean, it became violent later on. It went on for a couple of hours. They started to bust some heads. A bunch of people were arrested. Some people were sent to the hospital. There was a lot. I don't know how these Indians got involved, but apparently the Atlanta diversity was available back then, which is interesting because he writes a memo, famous memo, Colson, to Nixon. And this may be relevant to today, which is why I'm bringing it up. He wrote a memo called The New Populism. Dig that. 1972 in May. In there is a list of things that they want. He says that Nixon should go after. The Catholic vote, the blue collar, little man. We're not for big business. We're against the present tax system, and we're against big government, and we're going to go after blue collar workers. This is the Republican Party, Eric. Keep in mind, this is 1972 that Colson is writing this, way ahead of Trumpism that we see today, which is exactly the same as what Trump is doing. He foresaw this, going after the Catholic vote, going after the black vote. He writes this thing and gives it to Nixon, and Nixon agrees with him that this is where the direction we should be going. And instead of a Southern strategy,
I was going to say, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like a Southern strategy.
Right. Instead, he calls it the Northern strategy. And people are so upset in the North with something called busing. And they want to get this thing to be on the front burner. This anti-busing group, which is every parent whose kid is being bused to school. And I was bused the first day this thing was inaugurated. I was bused to a school far away, and so were all my friends.
My wife was too.
Dude, it was just insane. It was totally insane. We got bused to Amityville. We lived in Massapequa. We went to a school that was the worst in the state. There was violence. There was stabbings. It was crazy. That was what busing was about. And there was a blue-collar working-class element in Boston and the Northeast that was vehemently opposed to busing with violent protest, Eric. Anyway, so he, and I think Pat Buchanan also, wanted to strategize on how to make this something that they could use for their campaign, which Nixon embraces. And Nixon begins to do things with Colson. Now, what else does Colson do? Colson starts to investigate Chappaquiddick because of Ted Kennedy and the possibility that Kennedy's still going to run against Nixon. So they go up to Chappaquiddick. keep in mind, he is for a year. For 1 year, there's a Brown University club in D.C. that he's the vice president or the president of. I forget which it was. The other guy who's the president or vice president was E. Howard Hunt, who went to Brown. So he sees Hunt all the time. And Hunt works Colson for over a year because Colson is a guy that Hunt agrees with. Colson and Hunt, this is interesting. They wanted to come up with a conservative think tank like the Brookings Institute, way ahead of its time. They wanted to call it the Silent Majority Institute. Now you've got the Heritage Foundation. But back then, there was nothing. There was no alternative on the right to the Brookings Institute and all of these different Democratic liberal think tanks, Eric. Him and Hunt talked about this stuff for hours. Hunt is just working him. Hunt is reporting to Richard Helms. Hunt wants to get into the White House. Helms wants to get him into the White House. And the way Hunt gets into the White House is through Charles Colson. Colson will later admit this years later that he was worked by Hunt. He told St. John Hunt, his kid, that he believes the CIA killed his mother. This is all revelations that came to Colson years later after getting certain documents himself from FOIA from the CIA. So this was after Watergate I'm talking about. But right now, he brings in E. Howard Hunt. And why does he bring in E. Howard Hunt? He introduces him to Ehrlichman. And they give him, I think, room 238, which becomes the plumber's unit office or something in the executive office building. They give him this office, $100 a day as a consultant. And he begins to use Hunt as his go-to guy for his dirty tricks. Now, also, Colson is famous for something we now know is called the enemies list. The Nixon enemies list was created by Charles Colson. It had hundreds of people on it, institutions on it. The Ford Foundation was on it. Joe Namath was on it. There were people on there. You just want to like, oh, what the fuck did Joe Namath do to them? You know,
some of it I think is personal. I think some of it's political and some of it's just they get pissed off at people. It must be.
Yeah, I think it came down to like he would say something on the Johnny Carson show. I mean, it was that subtle where a guy would say a joke or something about
petty.
Definitely petty. Yeah, I mean they put these people on the list for reasons that we will never know. That's so crazy. But anyway, he begins to use Hunt for the beginning of his dirty tricks. Now, this is before anything. He sends Hunt up to Massachusetts, to Chappaquiddick, to get dirt on Ted Kennedy. Hunt is called, Ehrlichman famously calls Cushman, the deputy director of the CIA, and says through Colson that they want Hunt to have carte blanche, or whatever he wants to do, which is funny to the CIA because that's what they want. And that he's in the White House. Now, the White House is calling to say, can you please take care of this guy who's retired from the CIA and works for the Mullen Corporation over here in D.C., the Mullen PR firm, where Hunt has a day job, quote unquote. And they're going, sure, we'll give him anything he wants. So Hunt goes over there and he's getting all the spy gear, all the wigs. There's something you put in your mouth, which I'd love to find, that alters your voice. Some device that they never show. I've never seen it. There's also devices to alter your gait and tape recorders, and he gets all these different secret cameras and stuff, which is odd if you're not working for the CIA anymore. Keep in mind, Colson famously said years later that to prove his point about Hunt still working for the CIA, his secretary was on the CIA payroll the entire time through Watergate and before. His secretary was still working for the CIA and getting paid. That's I'm talking about E. Howard Hunt, which would be odd if your boss was no longer working for the CIA, as Colson pointed out. You know what I mean? Anyway, so Colson, I'll give you an example of what Colson did. Colson handled the $500,000, it was $1 million bribe from the Teamsters to get Jimmy Hoffa out of prison. Came in two bundles, $500,000 and $500,000. This is a Teamster pension fund money, went into the Nixon campaign money, went into their slush fund, And that was handled by Charles Colson, physically handled. Laundering of it, the acceptance of it, the dealing of it. They're getting Hoffa out of jail. Hoffa had served, I think, 4 years at that time out of an 8 to 12-year sentence. They had restrictions on him. Hoffa was infuriated when he came out that Nixon said he couldn't run for re-election of the Teamsters as part of the deal. Here's Hoffa. He's not happy about Fitzsimmons. But Fitzsimmons actually picks him up in the car, the new head of the Teamsters, and he tells Hoffa the restrictions, and Hoffa blows his head, and just starts screaming at Fitzsimmons as they drove away from prison with the $1 million bribe that was paid to the Nixon people to get him out. Now, the bribe is interesting, and the pardon is interesting, the clemency, because Hunt will later be told by Colson that Christmas comes every year. They waited till Christmas to pardon Hoffa and to get him out. And this is symbolic to Hunt, who believes that they did it with Hoffa, they'll do it with us. And it wasn't true. And part of the rub is that Hunt's going to blow, meaning he's going to talk. And Hunt pleads guilty and takes the fall stupidly, in my opinion, because they then throw him under the bus and he doesn't get clemency. But nevertheless, the Hoffa pardon is what indicates to Liddy, to Hunt, even McCord, the rat, who they all think is a rat, that they will be pardoned next Christmas if they, plead guilty. So they all plead guilty. Hunt pleads guilty. Liddy fights it. Liddy goes to trial and loses. But the Cuban plumbers all switch their plea to guilty because of Eduardo. Because Eduardo, their leader, pleads guilty. They plead guilty. And Sirica goes, what is this now? And that's what triggers the whole thing. But just to go a little bit backwards on the Colson thing, before we get there, Colson calls up a guy named John Caulfield, Shield 911. Caulfield and Ulasewicz are the two New York City cops, Al Gonzalez, who are involved in dirty tricks with Colson before there's even a plumber's unit, before there's Hunt, before there's Liddy, before there's Martinez, before there's McCord, there's John Caulfield out of New York and Tony Ulasewicz out of New York, these two New York City cops. And one of the great schemes they have, it's not their scheme, it's Colson. He wants to firebomb the Brookings Institute and go, this is unbelievable, because this ties into the crash that kills St. John Hunt's mother, Dorothy Hunt. Colson comes up with a scheme that they want to get the Pentagon Papers out of the safe of in the Brookings Institute. There's another version of the Pentagon Papers coming out, Eric, which I didn't realize. And in the new version, which is not out, it's going to cover the years of the Nixon administration. There's Tony Ulasewicz, the ex-New York City cop. The new version that's coming out that Colson uncovers is going to cover the war years of Nixon. The years that's covered in the ones that are being debated in the New York Times printing and the Washington Post printing don't cover the Nixon administration. It's not done yet.
By the way, I have that as Jack Caulfield.
What did I say?
Tony Ulasewicz or something?
Yeah, there's two of them, John Caulfield and Tony Ulasewicz.
Okay, Caulfield. I had him listed as Caulfield, so I didn't know.
Oh, that looked like Ulasewicz, though. That's Tony Ulasewicz. Caulfield wrote a book called Shield 911, by the way, which is very interesting. Anyway, so the situation becomes where Colson comes up with the idea of firebombing the Brookings Institute and then first altering the procedure in D.C. to make it so when there is a fire. Now, think how crazy this is to come up with this. When there's a fire in D.C., he wants to change the regulations that the FBI goes in first before the D.C. Fire Department. And they have the power to do this. In fact, when the plane crashes 553 in Chicago, The FBI are on the scene before the fire department, Eric. And then members of the Nixon administration are all appointed to various boards, FAA and transportation and other things surrounding airlines. So I think this early attempt by Colson will later happen with the crash of Flight 553. Anyway, so his idea is the FBI can go in first and then steal the Pentagon Papers out of the Brookings Institute. And this would be under the undercover of FBI, where Caulfield and or Ulasewicz could go in and get these papers, which would be kind of interesting that they would break into this thing. So they call it off at the last minute because it's so freaking crazy, Eric, that nobody will do this. This gets back to Haldeman, and Haldeman says, "Are you out of your mind? Firebombing this thing?" But when you listen to the tapes, when you read the transcripts of the tapes, I highly recommend this book by Stanley Cutler, which was gotten from me by the Watergate Donor Book Fund. This has new Nixon tapes. I think it came out in 97 and 98. In there, the transcripts are really crisp. And Nixon says, blow the safe. I don't care how you get it. Get in that Brookings Institute and just get it done. And he literally says to go in there and blow the safe. There's so many incriminating statements by Nixon way before the cover-up, Eric. Way before anything happens, Nixon is involved in so much chicanery and directing Colson to do so many things. He could have been indicted just on that. You know, the things that he claims that this is all covered by national security. I guess it's debatable in court whether that would have worked. It never happened. But his reasoning is Kissinger and Colson combine, and as we said in the earlier episode, to say we got to go to war with Ellsberg because they have a belief that Ellsberg has given the Pentagon Papers to the Soviets. In fact, Ellsberg denies it, and Bowden, his lawyer, denied it. And there's a photo of a man coming out of the Soviet embassy in D.C. Dropping off the documents, and it looks surprisingly like Charles Colson. Ooh. So he may have done it himself. He may have done it himself to frame Ellsberg. Part of his thing is he's in charge of framing Ellsberg. He's the guy that brings him in to break into Ellsberg doctor's safe here in Beverly Hills. That's all Charles Colson. Colson is involved in all of the actual physical. His title was he was liaison to unions. He was liaison to the press. He was an outside liaison to all of these outside entities. That's why he came up with the enemies list. That's why he brought in the construction workers union head who would become the Secretary of the Treasury. The guy who organized that hard hat rebellion is rewarded by being named Secretary of the Treasury. Yeah, Secretary of Treasury, I think. Right? No, Secretary of Labor. Secretary of Labor. I'm sorry, take that back. Anyway, so he's involved in all these dirty tricks, and that's what gets them going towards the Watergate explosion, is Colson and Nixon conspiring at night. Both of them are drinking at an alcoholic level. Colson is an alcoholic, and there's some debate whether Nixon is. He's only allowed to have 2 drinks. If he goes past 2, all bets are off, apparently. I don't know what happens because apparently he goes past 2 all the time.
As long as Colson's not around, he can go past 2. No.
Right. By the way, Steve McQueen was on the enemies list. And I remember him dancing with and dating LBJ's daughter. He was at one of her parties. Gregory Peck was on the list. Gregory Peck, who famously did acid and was involved in Oscar Janiger's, the psychiatrist, acid experiments in Beverly Hills. Maybe he was an enemy of the state. But yeah, 200 people on the list, 18 different organizations, including the Ford Foundation and others who are enemies of the state. Now, Colson said that these were people who were busting our balls, and we just put a list together, and we didn't really do anything to them. But the media made a big deal out of it, as they did about the attempted assassination of Jack Anderson. They were so fed up with Jack Anderson getting all these leaks and printing them in the paper. They couldn't find the leaks. this led to the internal bugging of everyone's phones, including Henry Kissinger and others within the White House. Is this Anderson? Yeah. Jack Anderson has so many connections to so many people. It's really interesting how many people were leaking to Jack Anderson and the staff that Jack Anderson had on his payroll. That's weird.
Yeah, that's it, with him and Johnny Carson bragging about his muckraking skills. That's Jack Anderson, though.
Okay, can you play that or?
Sure.
Okay.
That word muckraker, to tell you the truth, I was not sure. I had a connotation, I guess, like a lot of people. It sounds like an odious sounding type of thing that somebody does, but you...
It's what Teddy Roosevelt called the investigative reporters.
Was that the first use of...
I don't mind it because we're finding out there's an awful lot of muck to rake. And I think it's best to get it out in the open where I think sunlight's the best disinfectant.
Well, he had a guy on his staff, Bernard Fensterwald works for him, the lawyer, the so-called JFK assassination lawyer. And also he had a guy on his staff named Britt Hume, who will later become an anchorman for ABC and then Fox. He had a lot of people in his bullpen who were kids working for him, beating the bushes, coming up with stories all the time. So he was a very interesting character, and they wanted to assassinate him. And they discussed various ways to kill him. Poison, shoot him in the head. There was one that looked exactly like a situation that happened in D.C. Fake a robbery and kill him and take these documents that he had and make it look like a robbery in D.C. Eric.
That's a rich idea.
Yeah, and Mark liked it, except somebody higher up said, I don't think we could get away with killing him.
Wasn't that Liddy who came up with that?
Yeah. Well, no, they all talked about various methods of doing it, but the plan was to kill him one way or the other. I mean, they just couldn't figure out a way to do it. In fact, it went pretty far until somebody, it was probably Haldeman or Ehrlichman, who got wind of this thing, because those two guys were the only two rational people in the administration who would put a lid on these things. But a lot of the stuff that happened, Haldeman and Ehrlichman did not know what was going on internally. And you see that you read that in the tapes, the transcripts of the tapes later on when they're trying to figure out who knows what about who, and they start blaming people. There's Ehrlichman on the left, Haldeman on the right, the so-called Berlin Wall, these two men, along with Ziegler, who was of German extraction, and Kissinger, who was of German extraction. There was a lot of Germanic influence in the White House, if you believe in something like that. So the money comes through in $5,000 bundles from donors. The money for the dirty tricks literally comes from donors, like donor funds. And they'd call up a donor and they'd say, we need $5,000. We can't tell you what it's for. And the guy says, sure. One of them was Joseph Barodi, who was a bundler of money for them. And Nixon never wanted to discuss clemency. Ehrlichman would come in and say, whatever you do, don't talk about clemency for these guys. We don't want it on the record. The only one who knew the taping system was in place was Haldeman, and obviously Alexander Butterfield and Nixon and the Secret Service. The Secret Service was infiltrated. There was a guy named Wong who brought in a CIA guy who then was on the Secret Service, who helped install the Nixon tape. So the CIA was listening to everything in real time on those tapes, is what many people believe today, because they installed the actual taping system, and they were able to hear what was going on, which is an incredible amount of information if you think about it, Eric. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so when they go to break into the Watergate, Colson and these guys do not know what's going on specifically. Liddy calls up and tells Colson that they've all been arrested. Colson, speaks to Mitchell. Mitchell's flabbergasted. They are legitimately flabbergasted. If you read the transcripts closely, obviously the cover-up begins pretty quickly because they have to discuss paying these people's lawyers And the threat hovers over them all the time that if they don't pay the money for the lawyers, it's not like they're bribing them, but they are paying money for the lawyers and their expenses for the different people who were arrested. Hunt, of course, becomes the paymaster through his wife, Dorothy Hunt, and she begins to pay off these people. And that's where Dean famously comes in and said, this is going to cost over $1 million. It's never going to end. They're going to go to prison. And they discuss clemency. They talk about, different ways of who's going to blow, who's not going to blow. I mean, it really is fascinating once you get in the weeds. And there's a little segment here. I was looking at it last night. Let me see if I can find this here. It's Nixon and Colson. Oh, this is interesting. This is about the Washington Post, because we were discussing, Trump was discussing pulling the license of CBS, Eric, because of 60 Minutes. This segment here, if people could read it up on the screen, it's Nixon and Colson talking about pulling the license of a Washington Post owned station in Miami to get back at the Washington Post. And they were getting a group of investors, supporters, financial supporters of the Nixon administration, bundlers of money, to buy the station out from under the Washington Post as a reprisal for bad coverage. And it says, screw around. He's talking about the owner of the Washington Post. And Nixon says, screw around with her television license. Oh, yes. What's that?
Catherine Graham, it appears.
Yeah. How? He says, just not renew it. Is there a way we can do that? Yes, sir. It comes up for renewal every 3 years. When does it come up? I don't know. And he said, hope to Christ it comes up this year. And then Colson says, the sooner the quicker. How do we do that? You put a group together with Blackson and a bunch of other people and buy the station out from under them. This was one of the things that they were involved in. And I mention it today simply because we've heard talk from Trump about CBS. And ironically, Larry Ellison has purchased CBS from Paramount and is taking over in April. A lot of people don't know this. This is quietly done. David and Larry Ellison will now be the owners of CBS News. And I think you're going to see a cleaning of the house there. So keep that in mind. There's other little things about Watergate in there, but fascinatingly enough, the cover-up begins and Nixon is involved, directing it through Colson and directing it through Dean and directing it on every single level. It's amazing to me how deeply involved he got with this stuff in the weeds, Eric. You know what I mean? He literally is in the weeds directing this like a director of a movie. He's telling them to do this, let's do that, we can't do this. He's listening to them, he's hearing them out and, talking about clemency. And Colson is dealing with a guy named Bittman. Now, Bittman is the lawyer for E. Howard Hunt. Bittman's a Democrat. He's a veteran lawyer in Washington, D.C. And Bittman, to his credit, is trying to negotiate a deal for his client. Is this Bittman here?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's cool. So Bittman is dealing with Colson at this point. And there's one thing that they want to get on the table is clemency. And Colson famously says, Christmas comes every year. And that was the sign to Hunt that clemency was easily attainable, as they did it with Jimmy Hoffa, Eric. And Colson, whether he lied or didn't have the authority, is subject to debate. But at that point, Hunt pleads guilty to the crimes of he's sentenced to like 20 to 30 years by Mad Dog Sirica, who they are. You read the transcript about Sirica, and Nixon says, what's the deal with Sirica? And he says, I don't know. He's an Italian guy. I've known him for years. He used to be a boxer. This is Colson talking to him. The Colson-Nixon transcripts are the most fascinating in the Watergate tapes after 1996. There is a tape in there where he talked. This is really interesting. Sorry to digress, but there is a tape in there where they talk about a guy who has come over from another agency to work with them. And they say, and he says his name in the tape. And it says, this is from 1996. It's the 96 release. The name in the tape is deleted for national security. And then after that sentence, it says, he's written 40 novels. He's really a great writer and a great guy. But they deleted, to this day, that deletion of Hunt is in the official transcripts of the White House transcripts of Nixon's administration. That is amazing to me. That shows you that the CIA still has their tentacles into that process in the Nixon library, which was taken over by the government a number of years ago, as Eric and I have discussed before. It's not a private foundation. It's run by the National Archives now, which means they have their hands in all the different things that's going on at the Nixon Library, including, as Jeff Shepard told us, he was supposed to be on a panel with Dean for the 40th anniversary with John Dean, and they threw off Jeff Shepard to get John Dean on there, this scurrilous weasel, Jeff Shepard being the lawyer of Nixon, who's been on our show before. Nixon is talking to Colson. What happens in Maryland? There's a guy named George. Look at this guy. There's a guy named George Wallace who was shot in Maryland, Laurel, Maryland. And oddly enough, many people blame Colson for being involved in this conspiracy with Arthur Bremer. We don't know. It surely did help Nixon to take Wallace off the playing field. Okay. I mean, it doesn't help anybody else but George Wallace. But Richard Nixon. There's Arthur Bremer. Very happy. Nixon immediately says, wouldn't it be great if they found leftist literature in his apartment? And Colson goes, we could get that done. And then he says, but you know what? The FBI's already been in there and they've looked around. How can I put the literature in there? They're going to know that it wasn't there the first time they were in there. So Colson and Nixon are having this conversation. And they
this
said,
is all in the tapes?
Oh, yeah, buddy. Oh, yeah. It's great. Dude, the tapes are so entertaining. They're the greatest gift for a political junkie to read as they're having drinks and discussing this stuff. And he goes, I can get Hunt to go up there. And he goes, all right, let's get Hunt. And they tell Hunt to go up there. And Hunt says to them how insane this is. Hunt says, the FBI's already been in his apartment. I can't just go in and scatter leftist literature. They're going to wonder where the F it came from. And Colson goes, you know what? You're right. Forget it. But that's how far it went. They got Hunt on the phone to do this other dirty trick that they were going to put McGovern literature in there, Eric.
Wow. They didn't even need to.
But it's all overkill. That's the level. That's the lesson of Watergate. Everything is overkill. Colson and Nixon, they feel sorry for Hunt because Hunt's wife is dead. His kid has a brain injury from the car accident that we talked about. He is a loyal conservative, right? Mm-hmm. And Nixon says, we'll do a job on Hunt that'll make that son of a bitch look so great nobody will ever question him. I think it's pretty close to the tapes. We'll build that son of a bitch up like nobody's business. We'll have him on Buckley. We'll have William F. Buckley write a column about him. Well, Colson goes a step further, and we showed the tape of Hunt on Buckley's show. That event was created by Charles Colson. This was to rehabilitate Hunt when he was appealing his case. This was the attempt to help Hunt.
So he actually did like him then.
Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely. They loved Hunt. There was no doubt about it. Hunt was a like-minded individual. They did not know he was working for the CIA at the time, trying to undermine them. He was a great spy and belittled by a lot of people. But Hunt was a veteran spy, and his job was to infiltrate the White House and report his loyalty to Richard Helms, as was James McCord. James McCord wasn't able to penetrate the White House, but certainly E. Howard Hunt was. Keep in mind, the two different spy rings were already busted inside the White House that we mentioned before. There was a political writer, John Heilman's partner, Mark, what's his name, from the circus.
Halpern?
Mark Halpern's brother, David Halpern, was caught stealing documents out of Kissinger's briefcase. David Halpern. His father, Mo Halpern, worked with Leslie Gelb at the Brookings Institute to actually write the Pentagon Papers. So this is Mark Halpern's family. There's the father, I think.
Yes, Mo.
That's Mo Halpern. He was the one, far left communist who actually physically wrote the Pentagon Papers with Leslie Gelb, later of the New York Times. This is what drove Kissinger insane, because Kissinger discussed, how can I negotiate with these totalitarian regimes when our own administration is leaking out all the dirt about the Vietnam War to them? And he was absolutely right. And he brought Colson in as an ally in this particular battle. That leads to the break-in of the safe of the psychiatrist of Daniel Ellsberg on Bedford Avenue here in Beverly Hills. That brings in Hunt and Liddy and the Cubans for the first attempt at a plumber's unit event that we know of. They also broke into other places that we don't know about, the Chilean embassy in Washington, D.C., and hundreds of other places, according to Martinez, who later said he was involved in over 100 break-ins. I did not know that till years later, but Martinez famously said it. This is the one that got the publicity. They had asked for a CIA profile on Ellsberg. It was rather sketchy. There's Martinez, also a CIA employee. Everybody involved in this stuff on the outside looking in is a CIA operative, except for G. Gordon Liddy. They actually respect Liddy too. Colson thinks he's nutty, but they respect his ability to pull this stuff off. So, when this happens and Colson and is trying to keep a lid on this thing, it's going to blow, because they can't keep up with the payments and everything else involving Hunt. Now, who's doing the payments? Caulfield and Ulasewicz are secretly paying the money to Dorothy Hunt, who becomes the unofficial paymaster for the Watergate burglars. And they agree to this. Nixon agrees to this. Is this Ulasewicz?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe the other one was?
The other one was Caulfield.
Okay. So the two guys are involved in actually distributing the money. These two New York City cops, they're the ones who meet up with Dorothy Hunt and give her envelopes that are filled to the brim with cash. Now, you can construe this to be blackmail. You can construe it to be a payoff. You can construe it to be legal help. Hunt, when he famously goes on the Buckley show, says, we expect to be taken care of as spies if we're caught behind enemy lines. This is what the CIA does, and you have to take care of the family. You have to take care of the finances if you're in jail. And Buckley says, I understand that. And he starts asking him, is that in writing, and all these different things? But it's kind of an understood situation among spies. And if you're apprehended, your family will be taken care of. So the situation becomes that the Ellsberg break-in is really Colson's baby. And Colson begins to smear Ellsberg in the press with different news plants that he puts into the stories. Now, Ellsberg, like Assange, is going to be charged with the Espionage Act. I don't know if Assange actually was. We never really found out what happened in the grand jury.
I don't think he was. Well, I don't know.
Well, we don't know, because we never got the grand jury testimony. But Ellsberg is going to be going to trial. So they want to smear and influence the jury pool in D.C. about Ellsberg by leaking these stories about Ellsberg. And there's a lot to leak. There's a lot of crazy stuff that Ellsberg was involved in, which we'll get into. This is no innocent guy here. But from Colson's point of view, Colson says the guy's a freak of Marine. What happened to this guy? Nobody could get their minds around it. He was a captain. He was in the bush in Nam. He was with Lansdale. Nobody can get their minds around what the fuck happened to Daniel Ellsberg, to flip him like this. And of course, we now know he was honeypotted by various honeypots, which could do that to any man who's weak, even me. The situation becomes where he flips, and he's now this far left guy speaking at anti-war rallies and driving around releasing the Pentagon Papers all over the city to various newspapers. Now, what happens is all of these different people in the White House begins to come up the ladder, so to speak, to get each one of them. They're all finger pointing. They try to frame John Mitchell initially. And when you read the transcripts, they're going after Mitchell. And then you see they're going to they need a sacrificial lamb, Eric. So they think John Mitchell is the guy right there. That
and Nixon's okay with it?
Oh, yeah.
That's his old buddy. I thought
I'm sorry, Eric, but John Mitchell was a little too wily. They didn't get John Mitchell, but that was their original.
Wow.
Then there's also great transcript tapes of Haldeman coming in and saying Colson did this. It was his baby. He's got to go down. So they start to frame Colson that he's going to be the one. And then famously, Dean comes in and entraps Nixon into all this different dialogue about raising the money and everything else. That's the tape recordings then reveal the so-called smoking gun, which John Dean later said is not the smoking gun at all. But nevertheless, one by one, going up the ladder, the situation gets, the noose tightens. Now, Colson, when Nixon is reelected, leaves the government and goes back to his law firm, and he's working with a guy named Shapiro, and he's out of the White House. He's completely free of Watergate. He's not involved in the press, and he's not involved in any of the headlines. And he is called before the grand jury, and what they're attempting to do is see if Colson is involved in Watergate. So there's a guy named Leon Jaworski, who's the first special prosecutor. And Leon Jaworski goes over Colson with a fine-tooth comb and says there's really nothing here on Colson that we can get him on. Like, we don't. Yeah, here's Leon Jaworski. He's from Texas. He took his papers and went home to, I think they're in Baylor, which Jeff Shepard is trying to extract out of Baylor University. But he is the first special prosecutor, and or second, and he says there's nothing here to indict Colson on. And Colson, as like I said, has been out of the government. He's back in a law firm, and he's really depressed over the whole thing. He doesn't know what's going to happen. And there's a guy who is the head of, I think his name is Thomas Phillips. He was the head of Raytheon, multimillionaire CEO of Raytheon, lives up in Massachusetts. And he goes to see this guy, and he's really in a dark place. Now, keep in mind, Colson's an alcoholic. He is has all these guilty feelings for all the different evil shit that he did. And he goes to see this guy, Tom Phillips. And Tom Phillips gives him a book. And the book is by a guy named C.S. Lewis. It's called Mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis was a writer, British writer. And he wrote a book. He begins this Christian movement through this book called Mere Christianity. It's C.S. Lewis, the British writer. And he talks about, it's kind of a revival of Christianity when he writes the book. And in that book, the book is given to Colson by Phillips. And Phillips is born again, and he tells Colson that he's found Jesus Christ, and Colson doesn't know what he's talking about. Colson's wife is Catholic, and he is, I think, Episcopalian or Presbyterian. I'm not sure, but he believes in God, but he's not heavily religious or anything, and he's just on the balls of his ass spiritually and economically, and he's going to be in trouble in a couple of minutes with the Watergate people. So he reads this book, and he has an epiphany about Jesus Christ. Now, he's approached by a guy. This guy is a pastor named Douglas Coe. Now, Douglas Coe approaches Colson, and he says, "Would you like to join our prayer group?" And he says, "What kind of prayer group?" This is in D.C., Eric. This is around the White House. This is Douglas Coe. Douglas Coe asks Colson to join the prayer group. And in the prayer group are a bunch of different people, like Harold Hughes is in there. Congressman Albert Quay is in there. There's a bunch of different guys who are congressmen and senators on both parties. Now, Harold Hughes is a guy who was the governor of Iowa. He was a senator of Iowa, both senator and a governor. And he hates Colson's guts. Colson targeted Howard Hughes for a lot of different dirty smear tactics. So when they invite Colson to the prayer group, Hughes goes crazy. And they said, but, you know, Harold, the Lord, Jesus Christ says this, and they start quoting spiritual things to him. And Hughes says, all right, bring him in. Let's see what he says. And they bring him in, and they're having this meeting, and they're all, you know, congressmen and senators who are doing this. There's a guy named, a Democrat named Graham Purcell Jr. out of Texas. This is Quee. This is Al Quees, another congressman. He was there. Douglas Coe is there. Harold Hughes, not to be confused with Harry Hughes, the governor of Maryland. But Graham Purcell Jr. out of Texas was a congressman there. These are Democrats. These are Democrats that Colson went after. And they embrace him. I think that's Purcell. This is Graham Purcell?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So they, in this prayer group, they begin to bond with Colson, and Colson becomes a born-again Christian. He has a spiritual awakening. He takes the Lord Jesus Christ into his heart. He's taught how to do this. They have a Bible study there. And it gets to a point where Colson is offered a plea deal for Watergate, for the stuff he did to Daniel Ellsberg and smearing him in the press. It's a misdemeanor plea deal, and he doesn't want to take it, Eric. And he doesn't want to take it because he feels he didn't do anything wrong legally to accept the plea deal. And it's a misdemeanor. It's a slap on the wrist. And he says, I don't want to accept this plea deal. It says I'm guilty of something I didn't do. And in the arrangement, it says you'd have to plead guilty. He didn't want to do that. And he doesn't mind going to jail for what he did. He's quite prepared to go to prison. However, yeah, it's really weird. So they said, well, what did you do? And this is really interesting. The Seibert, who was the prosecutor, said, look, I can't find any crime on the books that you claim you did. And he writes up his own confession to a crime that's not even on the books. And he says, this is my crime. This is what I'm confessing to. And he gives it to the prosecutor and says, charge me with this. And he's a lawyer, Colson. He's a brilliant lawyer. He comes up with it, writes his own statute. And this is great. No, I'm telling you, he writes his own statute for him to plead guilty to go to jail.
Okay.
Okay. So Seibert, the prosecutor, says, okay. And in open court, they read this statute. He pleads guilty to it. And the judge is this German judge, Graham, what's his name? Gerhard Gesell, who was a German extraction. So Gesell, yeah, there he is. He shows up with his lawyer, Shapiro, and Shapiro starts making this long-winded speech. And Shapiro is a nut who had defended the Hollywood 10, who's a far-left attorney, who is actually his law partner, but he's also representing him. And he doesn't understand that this guy wants to go to jail. And he's like defending him with these long oratorical speeches. And Gesell says, look, I can't listen to this. I don't give a shit what you say. I have to sentence this guy. You're beating a dead horse. I think that's Shapiro on the right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Shapiro's quite a character. He's really funny, and he's his law partner. And he stays with him through thick and thin. So Gesell says, look, I'm sentencing you to, and he's convinced, by the way, he's convinced that he's going to get like 4 months max, probably a month for pleading guilty. He's completely convinced. And Shapiro says, I'm going to get you off. We're going to walk out of here with probation. And to their shock, Gesell sentences him to 1 to 3 years in prison. And he's kind of stunned that this happened. His family wasn't prepared for it. And he is sent to the Maxwell Air Force Base prison I described earlier on in Montgomery, Alabama. Here is a lineup shot of Colson in there from day one. Now, Colson goes in there for 1 to 3 years, which is quite stunning for what he pleaded to, merely smearing him in the press. And he doesn't even plead to any burglary things because he didn't do it. But he feels better that he's in there. So what does he do in the prison? He's attacked at one point by 2 ex-Chicago police officers who want to kill him because they were framed by Mayor Daley in some sort of scandal that came out of the Department of Justice. And Daley threw these 2 cops under the bus. This is crazy. And they end up in this Air Force Base prison. And he's told that somebody wants to kill him. He doesn't know who, Colson. And in the middle of the night, these 2 guys get him, and he is saved by this black guy who he had befriended, and they fight it out with these 2 cops. And he explains to the cops, I have nothing to do with this. This is not me. And the cops believe him finally, you know, because they were tracking him, trying to kill him inside there. But the real story of the prison is that he begins to create a Bible group. And in the Bible group, these prisoners begin to find Christ through the help of this man, Charles Colson. And he begins this Bible study group. And one of the hardcore black dudes who helped him in the fight, they have a prayer group, and he prays for parole. He's been turned down numerous times, and he gets paroled. And eventually Colson gets paroled. And in that prison where he started the prayer group, Colson creates a prison ministry, a prison fellowship, both in all the prisons around the country. When he gets out, Eric, he writes the book that I rightfully, what I showed earlier on, Born Again. He goes on Barbara Walters, and the book sells literally 1 million copies overnight. He's on 2020, a show that I was on, and Abby Hoffman was on famously, if you look at the Abby Hoffman episode. So he goes on there, and Barbara Walters interviews him, and this is part of his prison fellowship ministries. He has an episode with Harold Hughes in Harold Hughes's basement while he's awaiting sentencing, and the interviewer is a guy named Mike Wallace. And Mike Wallace doesn't believe, and nobody believes, Charles Colson, that he's a born-again Christian. It's mocked on the front page of every paper in the country. It's on every news show in the country. Nobody believes it because Charles Colson was so harsh and so surly and so nasty that they believe he's faking it. And Colson rolls with it, and he does this Mike Wallace interview with Harold Hughes, who's backing him up, and Hughes is saying, no, I'm telling you right now, Mike, this guy, and it's in the movie. We're talking the Born Again movie. There's a scene where the guy actually sounds like Mike Wallace. They call him Mike Wilson or something in the movie, but it's Mike Wallace. Before 60 Minutes, he was still doing the same thing. So he goes on Barbara Walters. The book takes off. He takes the money from the book and puts it into this prison fellowship and begins to spread the word of Christ throughout the nation's prisons. He begins to take prisoners from other prisons to bring in to this one in Maxwell Air Force Base. 160 prisoners are brought in for Bible study, and the thing begins to grow, and it becomes international, and this becomes the legend of Charles Colson. Charles Colson's legend is the prison fellowship, both nationally and internationally, that changed the face of our prison system in the United States. And it's kind of interesting. He had a slogan, he had something, a funny saying that a liberal is someone who hasn't been to prison yet. A conservative is someone who hasn't been to prison yet and becomes a liberal about prison reform, something to that effect. Very interesting what he becomes in regards to conservatism, that this prison reform becomes a program by conservatives and religious conservatives and evangelical conservatives, Eric, to spread the word of Christ through prisons. And he does this and becomes dedicated to it. And with his wife, dedicates their life. Here he is. It wasn't a lark. That becomes Charles Colson. I didn't know this. I thought he was full of shit. I remember hearing this in the back of my mind when this was going on in the 70s. But I always thought he was full of shit. He got a medal from George Bush, the Civilian Medal of Honor, whatever that is, the highest one. That was given to him. And then George Bush, he had, Junior I'm talking about, he had his own spiritual awakening at some point with his alcoholism. And Colson gave up drinking also on top of that. But, you know, he does all this because of Watergate. this never would have happened to him if it wasn't because of Watergate. So it's kind of interesting that this is one of the happier endings of all the different people involved in Watergate. The Colson one probably has the most upside of any of them on what they did post-Watergate, Eric, if you follow what I'm saying. Al Quie, this is really interesting about Congressman Al Quie. I think it was from Rhode Island. He volunteers and arranges for him to replace Colson in prison. He says, I will do the rest of your sentence, and somehow contacts the warden, and they're able to switch. There he is with George Bush, after the medal. It wasn't necessary because they eventually got, they were going to go to Gerald Ford. They didn't want to go to Ford. The other prisoners had already been released. John Dean, of course, serves no time. But what's his name? Magruder gets out. Everyone's out before Colson. So Al Quie, the congressman, says, I will serve the rest of your time as a Christian, switching with him, which was like, wow. Really? Yeah, no, dude, it was very heavy. It was very heavy. And Colson can't allow this, but then he does get the pardon. It's not a pardon, he gets paroled. And he does get out, and Quie does not have to do his time. But he gets out and begins this prison ministry, which is current today. While he's in prison, his son gets arrested and for drugs, and he's a drug dealer. The family's falling apart. And he pleads to get out for family reasons, which is, I think, how he gets out, because of his son being arrested in South Carolina. There he is with his wife, who I think died like 2020 or something. 2000, very late, very recent. It's his second wife, by the way. He got divorced. He married her in 1964 after he divorced the first wife.
Well, it makes sense that, I mean, he can't really say anything. How do you prove that you're not full of shit? Well, you just have to keep doing it until people realize, and he's serious about it.
Yeah.
And that's part of his penance.
Yeah. He accepted it. He took it. And he took the jail time, and he made it into a ministry, which is unbelievable. He started, he hooked up with Billy Graham at one point, and he learned a lot from Billy Graham, he says in the book, on how to do this kind of stuff. And look, what do I know? I mean, he's like the only guy. It would be like Dick Cheney finding Jesus Christ. You would just go, Dick, push it. What's that? No, I'm saying it's that crazy. That's the equivalent of who Colson was. It's the closest example that I could think of somebody in politics who was dark. It would be like Dick Cheney finding the Lord, which is hard to believe.
Well, I'm sure he'll claim it, but
yeah. Anyway, so yeah, Colson is a major figure in this, and as we go on, you're going to hear the craziest stories of what happened to each of these people. Haldeman and Ehrlichman have their own stories. Many bitter people at Nixon for not dealing with them. Yeah, look at that. That's a great shot. It's a great shot. Yeah. So anyway, it starts with a book. Is kind of interesting. The book by C.S. Lewis, which the power of books is enormous. People don't understand how enormous and powerful a book can be about a subject. And still to this day, this situation, it explains what I'm talking about books.
By the way, trivia, C.S. Lewis died on November 22nd, 1963.
Wow. A lot of writers died on November 22nd, 1963.
It was Huxley and Lewis both
Huxley died about 3 blocks from my house on a ton of LSD. He had terminal cancer. His wife administered to him apparently 2,000 or 3,000 micrograms of LSD, and he went out. As Leary did the same thing. Timothy Leary went out on acid too. And there's a street over here named Huxley Terrace, and the building he lived in is still there. But
and C.S. Lewis also was a contemporary and in the writing group with J.R.R. Tolkien. So he's a major.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, this new Christian movement starts with C.S. Lewis out of England. But it's not that weird because he is of British descent, Colson. So it's not that weird. But That book given to him by Phillips starts the whole thing down the road.
Awesome story. All right. Well, we've got a lot of support that's coming in here.
Okay.
But before we get into that, do we want to talk about what's coming up in
Well, you could talk about it. Go ahead.
I can talk about it. Okay. Well, we will be in Boca Raton, Florida, coming up on election night, November 5th. And well, I mean, you've got some breaking news, I think, of people who be, calling in and
Alex Stein 99 is going to be coming on from apparently from what he says Kamala Harris's headquarters.
celebration.
Rich Barris is going to come on from his number crunching bunker wherever he's doing it. Viva's coming over with his family because he heard there was free food. He's going to hobble over from. Apparently, it's about a quarter of a mile from his house. He looked at some geo-Earth satellite photos or something. We got him coming over. We got Dr. Drew coming on board for a pop-in with Dr. Drew. I think Drew is doing Reuben. A lot of these people are doing Reuben, Eric.
Nate the lawyer will be calling in.
Nate the lawyer calling in. We're going to have a lot of... Nate Hockman... Junior Nate Hockman.
The good Hockman.
The good Hockman is going to be part of the show too. So we're going to pop in and out. We're going to have the live coverage, the food, the drinks. And as I promised, sadly and stupidly, I will be buying drinks for everyone, for every battleground state we win.
And you may be buying a lot of drinks. It's looking possible.
It's looking terrible for me. It really is looking bad. One of the stupider moves in my life, but I'm going to stick with it and stick with my pledge. Every battleground state that Trump wins, I'm buying a round of drinks for the people who are coming.
Oh, by the way, those who are going to be coming, and if you're traveling, make sure that you vote early ahead of time. I just voted yesterday, so make sure you get that taken care of before you come down.
Yeah, we don't have a voting booth there. So you're going to have to vote before or that morning before you come down. But the hotel does have savage discount codes. They just added some more rooms onto the hotel list. Great hotel, completely renovated Holiday Inn in Boca. So it's really beautiful there. And the food, the menu is great. There's going to be a bar right there at the swimming pool. It's a whole great setup. And we're going to do the best we can. Hopefully it'll be an early night is all I could tell you.
Oh, yeah. Let's hope. I'm nervous because the way things are looking, that's entirely possible, but I don't want to.
Yeah. But we're all going to be together. So whatever happens, we're going to do it together. And that's the whole point of this meetup is that we're together for this come hell or high water. So join us if you can. There's still plenty of time. What do you got? A couple of weeks, Eric, before we got to go down there?
2 weeks from today. It's not.
Oh, 2 weeks from today. Okay.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
By the way, there's another significant thing about today.
What?
Today is our third birthday of this channel right here. What people are watching.
That's
YouTube.
insane. That's insane.
Yeah.
Have we ever missed an episode?
Yes.
What
we
happened?
Missed a Friday because you had no power, no internet whatsoever.
Oh, okay. Well, that was weird. Okay.
I think it was in July. You had no internet. There was a solar flare or something going on.
Oh, right. That was weird. Okay, so now we're going to alternate between the Watergate things and news on Tuesdays until this dies down. So next week will be news on Tuesday, and the following
then the
Tuesday,
election.
Oh, then the election, and the following week we'll probably get into John Mitchell. I think we'll do, or maybe Haig. I don't know. We'll have to see. We're going to have to get into more of these characters that are fascinating. Maybe Haldeman. But I want this to be a permanent record of all these different Watergate people, like the Kennedy thing. Nobody's ever covered these people in depth before as a series. And I wanted to be a permanent testimony about these people, good or bad. Some of them better than others, some of them worse than others, but definitely interesting, powerful men. Let me put it that way.
With living, people still around. So
Yeah. Oh,
John Dean is still around.
John Dean is still there, and as Jeff Shepard said, very litigious, although he never has won a lawsuit. He threatens all the time.
Yep, we got that made clear. All right, well, Pew Pew is back giving 20 America's Untold Stories memberships. Thank you very much. And Dustin, also a member for 4 months, is thanking Pew Pew as well. And I believe Dustin will be in Boca Raton. Adam Kahn, let's go Yankees.
Well, Friday night, Yankees-Dodgers World Series.
Damn.
I mean, it's a really terrifying event. 1963, of course, was the sweep. 77 and 78, losing to the Yankees with Reggie Jackson at the helm. 81, the Dodgers beat the Yankees. It's a long history going back to the 1950s, where they seemingly played and lost every single year until 1955, the year that I was born, and the Dodgers beat the Yankees that year, hence my birth. Which allowed for them to beat the Yankees finally in 1955. But nevertheless, it's going to be the biggest media circus you've ever seen in your life. These are the two biggest media markets, and Fox is thanking the gods of baseball every single day that they'll have this starting Friday night and Saturday night here in Los Angeles. The cheapest ticket is $1,300 for anybody who is curious.
Okay, well,
it's not the same in Yankee Stadium. Yeah, I mean, I've been to a couple of World Series. I'm not really jonesing for it. I was at the Red Sox series. I was at the Houston World Series. So it's not on my bucket list any longer. So I can live without going into that stadium.
Well, the Red Sox series where they broke the curse is probably the biggest one, right?
Well, it wasn't the biggest one for me. I mean,
just in general. I mean,
the Red Sox stole that one. They had a system of signs that they stole. So the hatred towards that loss is still there. Houston did the same thing and stole. Both of those were stolen World Series. Anyone who thinks the Red Sox one wasn't is crazy. They did the same thing that the Astros did to the Dodgers. So we finally won in 2020, but that was the COVID cardboard cutout, no fans World Series. I don't even count that season in 2020. I don't even count it as a real season. The COVID one was just too bizarre. So anyway, they've been in the World Series more than any team, I think 43 times, the Dodgers in history. So it's not unusual for to be in the World Series. Winning it is another story. I think the Yankees have the most.
Cool. Pamela Clifton, happy Tuesday. She's been a member for 19 months.
Wow.
Nice. And Pamela Clifton, here we go. President Trump was awesome at McDonald's. Is this orange, man?
That was great. You got to give it to him. I mean, they put on the apron and go in there and flip those fries. And
they're still talking about it. That was such an own. It's like, why can't they? It cracks me up. He managed to tweak them just right. All they have to say is something like, "Okay, it was funny. So what? Why doesn't he help?" And they could have flipped it or anything else, but no, they're like, "Oh, did you know, Mark, by the way, Newsweek pointed out that it was a staged event."
You know, they also pointed out that the AI version of him in the Steelers uniform was an AI thing. Nobody on earth could figure that out.
Possibly AI or seemingly AI. It's like, no, it's definitely, you dumbasses.
They also cut the amount of time he was exposed during the game when 50,000 people are chanting USA. They had to cut away from that because it was just too overwhelmingly powerful. That everybody in the stadium is standing there looking at this guy chanting USA. I mean, they had to cut that. They must have been flipping out in the control booth.
Oh, it is funny. All right, Sean Lucan gave 10 America's Untold Stories membership. Sean's coming in on the scene here lately, giving multiple memberships. Thank you very much. Mark H10, what is with the blue shirt, Eric and tie, Mark? Going to Harris today? Trump is scheduled for Friday, Joe Rogan. So what do you say when Trump wears a blue tie? Does that make your head explode?
What's the deal with this guy? I wear a tie in 500 shows. I've worn a tie.
I mean, he wears Dodger blue, for God's sake. Oh, don't do that. I think he's just busting our balls.
You're right.
10 more memberships. Thank you very much. Pew Pew's on the case today. And Joseph Kane gave away a membership. Thank you. Tim McLaughlin has been a member for 20 months. He's a Braves fan, and he's
I
going
like
for the
Braves
Dodgers.
fans. I've always respected Braves fans. They're a class organization, like kind of like the Cardinals. We've played them a lot. We always had to end up with the Braves. This year it was the Mets. Mets didn't take it so well, but I'm shocked that we won it. I predicted, as Barnes asked me for a prediction before the series, I said Dodgers in 6, which happened exactly as I predicted. I'm predicting this is a 7-game series. I'm predicting Dodgers in 7, slight edge because of home field advantage. I already told Barnes this. I don't know what he's betting on, but that's just my take on this particular series. I could be.
It depends on the spread, I guess, too. Barnes.
Yeah, I'm. It's a pick'em series. It's pick'em. It's 7 with a slight edge to the Dodgers because they have home field. That's my take on this upcoming series.
All right. QCC, I only had $1. Now I'm indebted. Okay.
Oh, he has 2 here. I found another $1.
Well, but you're not in too much debt. It's Canadian dollars.
Oh, it's Canadian. It's not that bad. Well, I also wanted to thank the book fund people for allowing me to get these books through their donations. I really appreciate it. There's 1 million Watergate books apparently, and I just want to thank them for that. Thank you.
Thor, I don't know how to say that, so thank you, Thor.
Thor.
Pew Pew with 200 Norwegian kroner. So I guess it's around 20.
All right, way to go, Kroner.
Is that kroner? I don't know, something like that.
You got me.
Elwood Bryant, Al Key was from Minnesota, later became governor.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Sorry.
Al Gonzalez. Got my ticket for the Boca event, and we'll see you there. It'll be epic. We're going to finally have both cops there, I think, out of New York, because I believe Alan is also on board and going.
Didn't we have an FBI agent at one point in Dallas? There was another guy who was FBI.
Yeah, I think there was.
There was a guy from the FBI there.
Yeah, former FBI.
Or maybe Department of Homeland Security. I'm sorry. Or ex-FBI was, right?
Yeah,
talking with us.
Like retired, I think.
Yeah.
I think you're right. He got in trouble with the rest of us.
Ooh.
He had no juice. Ooh. And Pew Pew closing out with 10 more America's Untold Stories membership. Thank you, Pew Pew. You're on a roll today. Thank you very, very much. At JS, add this to the drink fund. Hope you'll be able to use it.
Look, I got to come up with a code or something to make this work. Maybe drink tickets. Maybe if I ask that, what if I pay for drink tickets and then give them to the people?
I don't know. Is that like talk to them ahead of time.
Yeah, no, I'll talk to the lady. Yeah. I got to talk to her Wednesday anyway. I got to talk to her tomorrow about the food and the rest of the setup. But she said, yeah, they're going to give us a big TV screen. They're giving us the projection screen. She said today they added 10 more rooms on for the people to purchase for their travels. And these are king size rooms. Did you see your room? You see the size of that room?
I haven't. I just got
these are king rooms. It's like insane.
Well, awesome. It'll be great. We're looking good though. I mean, maybe we'll fill the place up. It'll be awesome to take it over. Rooms and all.
Mm-hmm.
Pirate Ken with $50. Thank you very much. I since Colson viewed CRP staff John Mitchell and Jeb Magruder as rivals.
Yeah.
If true, could Colson's apparent distrust in Magruder have increased as John Mitchell's CRP presence faded? Didn't Magruder plan covert actions with others as well?
Absolutely true. Magruder, who they all despise Magruder. I mean, everybody hates Magruder. This is before the trials and everything. Magruder is they're trying to work with him, and they begin to realize that Magruder is going to throw them all into the bus, and comes up with his own cock and bull story to save himself. Well, I also have Magruder's book that I just bought, which I haven't read yet. So Magruder is going to have his own episode. But yeah, that is absolutely true. At first, they attempted Mitchell. They call in Mitchell, there's Magruder. They call in Mitchell for a meeting, and this is featured in Gaslit, by the way, the Sean Penn, Julia Roberts Watergate series on I want to say HBO, but it's not HBO. It's one of those networks.
Stars.
Stars. It's on Stars. which has some good moments. There's some crazy crap in there. They just go berserk, but they do call in Mitchell, and Colson is featured in the scene, and there's microphones everywhere, and they start to say to Mitchell, "Remember when you planned that Watergate break-in, John?" And he's like, he quickly surmises that it's a recording going on, and he all of a sudden, as Sean Penn, he says, "Yeah, it was the same time you planned to bring in those hookers with Operation Gemstone." And he turns it on them in the meeting, and then gets up and leaves, John Mitchell, and he realized they were trying to entrap him. So it moves around of who they're trying to nail among themselves.
Good Lord.
Yeah, that's the fascinating part of Watergate at the end, when they're trying to find a big enough fish to stop the bleeding.
Wow. On Rumble, E. Haggerty is now a monthly supporter. Thank you. I didn't know they had monthly support on Rumble, but that's awesome.
Right.
And final super chat is Brian Morris with $9.99. No comment, but we always appreciate
Morris the
support.
Cat. He's the owner of Morris the Cat.
I remember Morris the Cat.
Who remembers Morris the Cat? Raise your hand if you
do.
remember Morris the Cat.
No,
Was that Purina or something? Or it was some.
I don't even know. It's like Meow Mix or Purina.
Meow Mix
It's
Purina,
one of
yeah.
them, but it was great. And he kind of had that, "Oh, I'm Morris." It's sort of that kind of a put upon voice over. Very fun. Well, we are going to be heading over now to locals. Yes, and people can follow us over there at unstructured.locals.com. There's a link in the description. They'll take you right to the show. You can be watching it. It is free to become a member. You can also support us there. We're well underway on the fifth and final part of Oswald, the audio drama. So it's over 10 hours. I think it's about going to be 11 to 12 hours all told. Yeah, because they're running longer than the 2 hours per. So if you roll it all together, it's looking like maybe 11, maybe even 12 hours of audio. So I mean, full-blown audio book essentially for all people who choose to support. We also put up special things there for people who are paying. But again, I don't know. What do you say, Mark? 90%, 85, 90% of the content is freely available for everybody.
Oh, I don't know. I really don't know what's available or not. It's, to me, I don't know. I know you got to join to get the Oswald stuff.
Right, for paid support. So we do have special things, but I also want everybody to know that just because you maybe can't afford it or you don't wish to, you're still going to get benefit out of it. And by being over there, being a member, if things go weird with YouTube, and believe me, things go weird with YouTube, you never know, it enables me to post, and you will get notification about the shows when they go on, what's happening with us. So it is helpful for us.
The election night thing is they're having a watch party in Houston, by the way. They're starting to form watch parties of our show, which you don't have to come to. You could be at home because it's Tuesday. We're going to do the show live anyway.
Nice.
There's a woman who can't make it. I forget her name on Twitter, who's having a big watch party in Houston. I don't know if they have to be in Houston to be part of the watch party, but she's getting her friends together election night to have a watch party of the election night thing that we're putting on in Boca.
Oh, that's awesome.
So you can have your own watch parties wherever you live if you can't make it. But we'd strongly recommend you show up so you can be with us.
Yep. And
if you can, I mean, if you can.
And if not, you will, we will be broadcasting, and, we hope to see you there, and we appreciate all the support and everything. And happy birthday to us.
Happy birthday to us, 3 years old. Apparently for 1 year, we have not picked up a single subscriber. And I'd like to say this really to anyone who has been unsubscribed. If you're willing to send Eric your information, I would like to compile a list of people. And a lot of them have told me this. They've been unsubscribed by YouTube. I want to get a list together. We lost 11 people in one episode, and I guarantee you 11 people did not watch that episode and decide to unsubscribe to the channel because nothing happened in the episode that was aberrational. But if you would help us. It would be great if you could send Eric your information if you have been unsubscribed by YouTube. I'd like to get a list of people who have had that happen to them. And I'll say this again in a couple episodes, but it would be great to have a list of those people. Thanks.
Just go to americasuntoldstories.com/contact. There's a contact form. It'll get to both of us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to go. But for now, we are going to head over, those of you who are on X or Twitter or Rumble or what have you, and YouTube.
Can they come over?
Locals, come on over.
They can.
See you soon. Absolutely.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go to the bathroom.